Hi guys, it's Katie from Created by Katie, and today I am here to share with you a very simple card, and we are going to be embossing. And this is some very basic embossing techniques today. I wanted to show this because I did have a request from someone who is brand new to stamping. They wanted to learn how to do some embossing. So I'm just going to show you some very, very basic embossing. The first thing that you are going to need is an embossing gun. You can get these embossing tools. Close to My Heart sells them, and you can get them from other companies or big box stores, or most craft stores have a gun similar to this. I've had mine for a long time, so it may not look like the ones that you find now. They may have updated them or they're newer, but I've had mine for a long time and it works amazing. The next thing that you're going to need is some good pigment ink, and it's important that it's pigment because that gives the ink pads are juicier, I guess is the words that I'm looking for. And you need something that's nice and juicy and doesn't dry right away, so that when you put your embossing powder on there, it has something to stick to. Versamark is a perfect one because it's a clear stamp, or a clear ink, I'm sorry. And that way, whatever color you decide to use of embossing powder, you do not have to worry about the ink color showing through. If you were to use a colored ink, pigment ink, and clear embossing powder, you would see the color that you have for your ink. So that's just an idea too. But Versamark, especially if you're starting out, Versamark is a perfect ink pad to get, and you can get refills so that you can refill this ink pad. Now, I have been storing my embossing powders in a couple of different ways, and I just changed them all over to these little containers. So this is what it is. I've got some white and some black here today that I'm working with. Close to My Heart sells 4 different colors of embossing powders, and there are other colors out there if you wanted to do something of a different color. This, you may be wondering what this is. This is an anti-static tool. And what this does, when you rub this over your cardstock before you stamp your image, this will keep the embossing powder from sticking to your cardstock and sticking to places where you do not want it to go. So this is not necessarily something you have to have, but it is something that will help you and help you to get a crisper image on your project. So let's get started. Here is a sneak peek at the card that we are going to be working with today. We're going to be embossing this background, and then we are going to be embossing this sentiment. So let's get started. The stamp set that I'm going to be working with today is called So Many Smiles. And this is what it looks like. It's these fun little circles. And I thought that since I'm kind of going for a basic card for you today, that these circles embossed on the craft cardstock in white embossing powder would be kind of a fun background. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. So I've got my block here. And before we get going, I'm going to use my anti-static tool here, and I'm just rubbing. You can kind of see there's a bit of a powder that comes off on there, and after you're done you can kind of wipe that off or shake that off if it bothers you. And excuse my little image there. It's not hurting my ink pad at all, but I do share things with my kids and I don't really care. I let them do whatever. Stuck. Okay, I put the scratch paper underneath here because I wanted to use these images and stamp off the edge. Now it's kind of hard for you to see. You can just barely see, and that's what this is like a watermark stamp pad. So you just barely see that. And I'm just randomly placing these images on the cardstock. And let's see, this one's kind of fun. It's a little bit bigger and bolder. Oh, that one didn't get perfect, but that's all right. There we go. And maybe one right there. And how about this one? And you can just kind of place them however, wherever. This just makes for a very fun background, as you'll see here in a moment when I get everything done. And now I'm going to go in and kind of fill in some of the spots with the smaller image. Let's see, maybe just the edge there, and then maybe even one more here. There we go. Okay, so now I have stamped my background, and you can use this paper, which I'm going to flip it over, and that's what I'm going to use just because this is a bigger. And I folded it in half, and I'll show you why I did that in a moment. But I've got my cardstock that I stamped, and then my white embossing powder. And you want to be liberal with this. You need to put a lot on there, and you're going to think, oh gosh, I'm not going to have any embossing powder left, but you will. We'll put the remaining stuff back in here. And I'm going to pick it up and just kind of shake it side to side and make sure that everything gets covered. Now, I see some little spots that I'm not sure why they got that, but I am just going to use a little paintbrush and just wipe those spots off. Now, there are some times where things happen, mistakes happen, and you know what? That's what I say. There are no mistakes in stamping. You can just cover it up or brush it off and start over. Looks to me like some of these outside ones, I don't know, I'm not really happy with all of those, but overall that looks pretty cool. So before I get this going, I'm just going to take our little paper that we folded in half and pour this back in here, and you can reuse that again later on for another project. So embossing powder, you know, comes in fairly large quantities, but you're going to use it over and over again. I mean, you're probably never going to run out of your embossing powder unless you're using it all the time. So now I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to heat this up, and I'm going to speed up this part of the video because it's kind of loud and it's kind of long and it's kind of crazy, but hopefully as I'm doing it you'll be able to see the change in this. And I think I'm going to try to Okay, that did take a little bit longer just because some of these images were a little bit bolder and bigger, and there was quite a few of them on there. But there we have our fun background. Hopefully you guys can kind of see some of the shimmer that the embossing powder makes. Okay, so now I am going to create a little strip here across the front of my card where I'm going to stamp the sentiment. And I think, I'm trying to decide, but I think I'm just going to go with basic white again, just simply because I think that will really pop instead of going with black. And how about You Are Fabulous? I think that would be a really fun sentiment to have on here. So I don't need that. That is for underneath. And I'm just going to ink this up. And I am going to tell you that we'll see how this works, but some fonts work better than others. And I haven't played around with this one, but that's stamped really good. So I think this will be just fine. And this is another tip. If you just have a smaller image like this, you can use a coffee filter instead of the paper underneath there. And that's what I'm going to do right now. Or we could just do this too. This would work perfect. And then I don't have to worry about getting it back inside there. There you go. All right. Ooh, that looks like it's going to stamp very pretty. All right, here we go. Back to embossing. Oh yeah, that's stamped. I mean, I see a little bit of flubs there, but that really looks nice. That looks awesome. Okay, so let's put our card together now. That is the basics of the wet embossing. And I've just got some basic craft cardstock that I cut in half the long ways. So this would have been an 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock. This is from Paper Tray Ink. And I just cut it in half the long way, and I'm going to score it with my scoreboard at 5.5 because it's the long way. And this makes a regular A2 sized card, folded in half like that. If you don't have a scoreboard, you can just wing it and line up your edges and fold it in half. And then I've got some cream cardstock that I cut to 4 inches by 5.5 inches. So it's just slightly smaller than the base of the card. And then this one was even just a little bit smaller than that. And this big tool that I'm using, if you're not familiar, is an ATG gun. It's just a big gun of tape that I use to get all of my cards put together. I love it because it lasts a long time. It is kind of big and bulky, but it lasts a long time. Okay, now I'm ready to put our sentiment across the front, but I want to add some color, so I'm going to add some shimmer trim to this. This is new from Close to My Heart. This is pretty, very pretty color. And it's adhesive back, so you just need to pull the back off of here. So we've got some embossing going on this card, and now we're going to have just a little bit of glitter just to kind of add a pop of color, because this is a fairly neutral card that we're working with. And I just want it just a smidgen above there. Save that little piece for later and wrap these around. And then I've got my sentiment, which I think this sentiment goes perfect with this shimmer trim. What do you think? Fabulous. Okay, and then I'm gonna make sure that I've got good amount of adhesive on here along the bottom and again in the middle, and make sure on the edges. And then I can just, I really should have trimmed it down, I think, but we'll make it work. It'll be okay. There we go. So there you go. You've got some fun embossing on the background and your sentiment and just a smidgen of color to make the whole thing pop. So I hope that that helps you if you are new to embossing. It gives you some tips and ideas on how to use embossing powder and the embossing tools. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.